Greetings my friends, and welcome to a special outing on the Metropolitan Line today. This is still a realistic recreation, or as realistic as I can make it using Transport Fever 2. My previous videos have covered all the routes on the Met in all directions bar 2, Chesham to Chalfont and the Watford spur going up to Watford. But today I shall put that right. But what is special is that you get not one, not two, but 3 Christmas crackers by way of a seasonal present. Cracker 1, we're going to do these 2 routes in a single journey, Chesham to Watford, and we're at Chesham station now. I think I'll just rotate the view as we wait for our train to come in. Chesham to Watford is not a normal service. In fact, I wonder if any train has ever done this journey other than in an emergency. But it is straightforward, because my second cracker is that we're going to use the North Curve, the direct Rickmansworth to Watford connection that is no longer used by any scheduled passenger service. My third cracker is we're not going to be travelling on a modern S-stock train, but on its predecessor, the venerable and much missed A-stock. I'll talk a bit about my personal history with those trains later, but right now here is our train by a brilliant bit of management by my production team, and we'll wait for it to stop and be ready to depart, and then we'll get into the cab view and we'll do this special journey. I will be filming some of this using the flyby mode, so that we'll be above the train rather than through the cab. This will show you a bit more of the scenery. It will also show you where there are gaps in the scenery, but I'm not going to do anything about that now. Right, I think we can get into the train. We'll be here just for a few seconds. And we are off. Very irritating flicker on those platform segments, for which I apologise. Speed is limited on this approach section to the station, but we'll speed up in a moment. So let's leave the cab and get a nice position above the train. And to our left, the valley of the River Chess. quite tricky keeping the camera above the centre of the train and avoiding the trees. We're climbing steadily at this point because we have to get over the ridge that separates the valley of the River Chess from the valley of the River Misbourne. And in fact what we're doing is climbing onto the ridge between the two valleys, which is the line that the railway took. And these are really the outlying suburbs, I suppose, of Amersham. One of the many industrial estates in this part of the world. And we're coming up to our junction with the main line. Although in fact we don't join the line at this point, we run along it for the best part of a mile up to Chalfont-on-Latimer. And we'll try and move the camera to see if we can reduce the irritating flickering that this railway mod that I'm using produces. This is the third rail mod, which is as close as I can get to simulating the fourth of the four rails that are used by the London Underground system. Coming up to Chalfont and Latimer station, and here is where we will switch over to the main track. If you're wondering why the passengers stay on the platform and don't get onto the train, I'm using just static models. Well, we've covered this section of the journey before, so I'm going to get into the train and I'll ramble on a bit about my experiences with the A stock. So now we're in the cab view. There's the front of the train, very familiar sight to anyone who's ever travelled on the old Metropolitan Line. These trains started service in 19 61 and were taken out of service between 2010 and 2012, at which point I think they were the longest running trains in continuous service anywhere in the world. So we'll go through the train, and this is very distinctive carriage setup, because all of the seats are transverse, which is very unusual for a train designed for commuting and for high intensity use in a city. The S stock has about a third less seats. The person who made this mod has done a nice stab at replicating the pattern that London Underground used on the seats, the moquette as it's called. The train does not, unfortunately, have maps and the usual warning signs and the adverts with which these carriages were always festooned, but it gives you a sense of what it was like to travel on it. And at the back, I'm trying to keep the camera level, but as I move it goes either up or down, it doesn't keep level with the train. This should be a connecting door between the carriages. It was possible to go between one carriage and the other, though the lock was very stiff. People sometimes did it when the carriages they were in were overcrowded. It wasn't something I ever did. Also, because this is the driving cab, this section of the cab was where the guard would be if this was the last car off the train, and he'd have a little metal bar that he could put between the two armrests that you can see there that would give him some privacy, and his control pad with all the buttons on either side of the two doors. And he also would have, I can show you this where it would be, I'm just going to get back a little bit, yes, set into the back of one of these seats would be a pull down seat, secured again by rather stiff, what you call it, not a handle, but a catch that was quite awkward to move. But the guard would sit on that during his service. But of course the A stock comprised 4 driving cars and 4 non-driving cars, and each of the driving cars was equipped to drive the train and had a guard's control section in it as well. So the bit that wasn't being used, the 3 cars that weren't in use by a guard on any normal train, anybody could go into that section and pull the seat down. But very few people who were not regular commuters realised this. It was something I used to do if the train was crowded, and you get people looking at you in astonishment as you suddenly produced this seat from nowhere. The other great feature of the A stock was that they had luggage racks, and above each seat was an aluminium rack. This again was one of the features of the A stock that mimicked mainline trains, because you don't get luggage racks on any of the other London Underground stock. And I think I'll just move the camera back to being above the train. We're on key. That's better. See where we are. We have just passed through Chorleywood Station, coming here under the M25 and on our way towards Rickmansworth. But the luggage racks, as I say, is a very distinctive feature, and they were so popular that when the trains were taken out of service, the racks were taken out of the carriages and sold by London Transport through their museum shop. And I looked at that shop the other day, and they are now selling replica luggage racks. So if you want to own something to remind you of the stock, you can still get a luggage rack, and I suppose you could put that up in your own home and pretend you're on a train. The A stocks used to go pretty fast, and nowadays there are strict speed limits, but they were much looser about these things in the old days. And in the section between Harrow and down through Wembley Park and the long section up to Finchley Road, these trains would often reach speeds between 60 and 70 miles an hour, which may not have been strictly permissible, but the drivers seemed to get away with it, and they often did that if they were chasing a Chiltern Line train. and these trains would shake at that sort of speed. You get hurtled around, and the luggage would move around in the luggage racks above your head. So if you had a heavy briefcase, which I often had when I was coming home from work, then it could be quite scary watching your luggage shifting in the rack and yourself being pretty well thrown out of the train, thrown out of the seat on some occasions. But also quite exhilarating. They don't drive like that anymore. I'm just going to go back to the front of the cab, a more conventional view, and we will proceed now to Watford directly using the North Curve. My understanding is that a couple of trains a day will take this particular route, having been stabled at Rickmansworth overnight so that they can get to Watford for the start of service, but they never carry passengers. I rode the A stock when I was at school every day for 6 years. I had it as my main method of getting into London for another 20 odd years, and this is the North Curve. So we leave the main track and go through a tunnel. So I've calculated that I've probably spent the best part of at least 25 years travelling on the Met every working day. Through the tunnel, very short tunnel, and we will join the track that's coming up from the normal route, the South Curve. Usually when people make mods of trains, the driver is shown sitting down, but for some reason the guy who wrote this mod has got him standing up. And again, I'll rotate the camera, and the camera sort of moves in a very wide circle. It doesn't turn on its own axis. Here we go, and nice view of the track. It's not the best model in the world, but it's lovely to have it because it is the only model available for this game of the A stock. So we'll go out the front of the cab again, and we will now come into our penultimate station at Croxley. I made one mistake in my earlier video about the route from Watford. I said that when the Met came here they called this station Croxley, because there was already a station called Croxley Green, which was on the short railway created by Lord Ebury to connect Watford and Rickmansworth. Originally this was just a branch line of that railway, but I was incorrect. It was also called Croxley Green to start with, and renamed Croxley sometime later. And while I was doing research for this video, I came across information about Lord Ebury's railway, and what I had not really realised before was that he wanted to build a railway from Rickmansworth to Uxbridge, which would be a distance of about 6 or 7 miles running down the Colne Valley, and he wanted to connect to the Great Western Railway, who had a connection directly into Uxbridge. We're talking about 1860. This is long before anybody in the Metropolitan Railway considered coming out to this part of the world. Indeed, the Metropolitan Railway had not even commenced its operations. And it has given me the idea to try to recreate that railway at some point, so that might be one of my projects for next year. Just coming into Watford, I've set up Transport Fever so that all the normal Watford trains come into platform 2, and I've made this train come into platform 1, so it will not interfere so much with any of the scheduled services. And this is the end of our journey. We've combined two routes that normally would never ever get combined. I've had the pleasure of using the North Curve, and of course we are travelling on the dear old A stock. One last look at it of our driver, who's still standing up there wondering where his seat's gone. And indeed there is an S stock on the other platform. I do hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you've enjoyed it, well, why not leave me a like, or leave me a comment, or indeed subscribe to the channel. And thank you very much indeed for your patience.